Okay, good afternoon, everyone. You're all very welcome to today's webinar, Why and How of Accessibility in Cultural Contexts. Just a little bit of housekeeping first. Please note that this session is being recorded. Captioning is being provided by MyClearText. This can be accessed by clicking on the CC tab at the bottom in Zoom, or captions can be displayed in a separate window using the link which my colleague Adrian is pasting into the Zoom chat now. ISL interpreting is being provided by Bridge Interpreting. If a presenter is sharing their presentation screen, and in fact all four presenters have presentations, please remember to stretch the windows so the interpreter is visible in the way you require him or her. My name is Pádraig Naughton. I am Executive Director of Arts and Disability Ireland. The National Development and Resource Organisation for Arts and Disability. ADI describes itself as championing the creativity of artists with disabilities and promoting inclusive experiences for audience with disabilities. This we do in partnership with the arts and cultural sector. This introductory webinar on the why and how of accessibility in cultural contexts is intended to give an overview of the legal and regulatory obligations that apply to art centres, galleries, museums, festivals, and venues in the nighttime economy when implementing accessibility for people with disabilities. Our speakers today are Leah Urzel Francil, PhD researcher on the European Research Council project Dancing at the Department of Law and Criminology at NUI Maynooth, Dr. Gerald, Craddock, Chief Officer at the Centre for Excellence in Universal Design at the National Disability Authority, Dr. Donal Fitzpatrick, Senior ICT Design Advisor, again from the Centre for Excellence in Universal Design at the National Disability Authority, and Eoin O'Herlihy, Managing Director of O'Herlihy Access Consultancy. Biographies for our speakers can be found on the webinar Eventbrite registration page or on ADI's website, adiarts.ie. This webinar will last for approximately 90 minutes. Each presenter will speak for about 15 minutes maximum, which will be followed by a facilitated Q&A. Feel free to submit your questions via the Q&A function during the presentations. I would like, and with that, actually, I'm going to hand over to Leah to start her presentation.
Hello, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen now. Please let me know if you, I think you can see it. Yeah. So, yes. So I'm Leah Urzel Francil. I'm a PhD researcher in Maynooth University, and today I'm going to discuss accessibility and highlight the legal framework in Ireland, pinpointing legislation and different obligations in Irish law. So in this presentation, I'm going to focus mostly on persons with disabilities from an audience perspective, but there are also a number of obligations relating to employment. So I've divided my presentation into three parts. I want to first introduce the different layers of legal obligation. Then I will go more at length on accessibility in Irish law to finish on highlighting differences between accessibility and reasonable accommodation. As I said, I will start with providing some introductory remarks on the different normative layers which impact on accessibility in culture in Ireland. So as you can see, there is like an international, European, and national levels. As it is layered, it's also complex to navigate, and in practice, it's not always clear-cut. So I want to provide here a big picture, but for that reason, I also cannot go into too many details. So highlighting first the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, or CRPD. It's an international treaty that entered into force in 2008 and was ratified by Ireland in 2018, which was the last EU member state to do so. In that respect, Ireland has a dualist approach, and in that I mean that the ratification of the treaty does not mean that the convention becomes part of domestic law, and unless they are specifically incorporated by an act of the Irish Parliament. In other words, there are different articles of the convention that the different articles of the convention don't have a direct effect at the national level. An individual cannot go to court arguing that its rights under the CRPD have not been respected. So maybe you wonder why I talk about the CRPD now, but I think it's worth mentioning it because the CRPD still has some influence, and it also conceptualizes accessibility in a relevant manner and can be a reference point at the national level. For example, the CRPD was recently cited in the case law of the Irish Supreme Court in Nanonagel. There is also an optional protocol to the convention, which has yet to be ratified by Ireland. It provides a mechanism for persons with disabilities to bring individual complaints against state parties to the CRPD committee. And now I want to talk about 3 articles that are interesting. So we have Article 9 on accessibility, Article 21 on freedom of expression and opinion and access to information, and Article 30 on participation in cultural life. So the CRPD does not define accessibility in technical terms, but it still highlights that it's a precondition for persons with disabilities to live independently and participate fully and equally in society. And as such, it's also closely linked with the concept of universal design. So the CRPD indicates that it concerns the physical environment, transportation, information and communication, including technologies and systems, and also other facilities and services open or provided to the public. It requires providing information in accessible formats, recognizing and promoting the use of sign languages, and facilitation of communication, for example, in Braille or other formats. It also applies to private entities and market operators so that they can provide accessible services and facilities too. In the CRPD, accessibility is an obligation of progressive realization. So progressive but unconditional. So it demands the adoption of all measures that are necessary to ensure accessibility. And it means that states must implement accessibility to the maximum of their resources. It does not suffer any exception, for example, based on a potential cost to barrier removal. So it includes the obligation to ensure access to all newly designed, built or produced buildings, goods and services, but also the obligation to remove barriers and ensure access to the existing ones. I will now go on to the EU level. So the EU is also a party to the CRPD, so it drives the EU action on disability and is referred to in EU case law. A number of EU legislation address accessibility. I want to mention here very briefly, there are regulation on passenger rights. More interestingly, there is a new European Accessibility Act on products and services. So it requires member states to guarantee accessibility of goods and services falling within its scopes as of the 28th of June 2025. So it's in terms of the scope of the directive and how it relates to culture, it's not very straightforward. So accessibility of cultural media content, so performances, theatre, cinema, as well as of buildings open to the public, including theatres, monuments. They're not included in the scope of that act. And however, there are some other products that guarantee access to cultural goods and services. And here I can think of ebooks or, for example, ticketing machines to access a cinema. That will be within the scope of that act, of the directive. So I don't know if you're very familiar, but if it's an EU directive, it means that it sets binding goals on Ireland and other member states, but Ireland still need to transpose it and still need to figure out the details for the national level. Unfortunately, Ireland is one of the few that has not transposed it yet. The deadline was last June, and there is infringement proceedings on the way. There are also the Web Accessibility Directive, but I believe it will be discussed further by Dr. Fitzpatrick. And then there is the Audiovisual Media Services Directive, as well as other legislation relating to copyright and public procurement. So following these remarks, I will now focus on the Irish legal framework. So Ireland has adopted and reviewed a number of legislation, policies, strategies, such as the Disability Act 2005, the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission Act, the Equality Acts, the NDIS, National Disability Inclusion Strategy, or recently the Irish Sign Language Act. Some were adopted or reviewed prior to CRPD ratification to ensure better compliance. There is also in Ireland a number of areas where national legislation implements EU legislations, as I just said. So, for example, here we would have the European Union Accessibility of Websites and Mobile Application of Public Sector Bodies Regulation 2020, which is a transposition of the Web Accessibility Directive. So in terms of accessibility in Irish law, I want to first look a bit more at the Disability Act 2005, which lays down Ireland's commitment to a universal design approach, and which is further considered in the NDIS. And what is quite interesting is part 3 of the Disability Act, which sets out the accessibility obligation of public bodies towards persons with disabilities. It concerns buildings, services, and information that must be accessible to persons with disabilities, including also heritage sites. There is this condition that as far as practicable, they must be made accessible to persons with disabilities. Here it defines public buildings as any building or part of a building, which is members of the public generally have access, or which is occupied, managed, or controlled by a public body. The National Disability Authority has created codes of practice which relate to that act, one on the accessibility of services and information, and the other one on accessible heritage sites. The implementation of these codes are monitored by the NDA, and they are in line with the Disability Act. So in this respect, the NDA Code of Practice on Accessible Services and Information was revised in 2022 to include measures also meeting the needs of sign language users. To the best of my knowledge, I've not seen it yet published or approved, but hopefully it could be soon. In that respect, the Irish Sign Language Act now requires public body to do all that is reasonable to ensure that interpretation in sign language is provided. So it still introduces some conditions. So individuals may use access and public services in sign language if they cannot hear or understand English or Irish, and upon request. In this respect, the NDA has indicated that there is a need for further clarification on the scope of the specific services that fall within the remit of this act. I can also just mention the Part M amendment of the building regulations on access for people with disabilities, which considers the minimum requirement for building accessibility. It does not apply to existing buildings unless they are being altered or refurbished. And there are also some exceptions regarding public buildings. Sorry. In terms of, in practice, as I've said earlier, the CRPD says that accessibility is an anticipatory duty. It is progressive, but unconditional. However, as I just presented, in Irish law, there are limits that are introduced in the law, limits to providing accessibility. So we have seen like what is practicable, what is appropriate. There are also like terms of justifiable on cost ground, or in some instances, it must be triggered also by an actual individual request. And in that terms, in Ireland, we cannot say that it is anticipatory. In terms of the obligations for public bodies, so the Disability Act defines public body as government departments, local authorities, and bodies or organizations such as state and semi-state organization. It includes cultural institution and public agency, the Art Council, for example, the National Gallery of Ireland, etc. The legislation covers a wide range of services and facilities provided by public bodies and that are available to the public. So the public body is responsible for the accessibility of any place it owns, manages, or controls. In that regard, I also want to mention the section 42 of the Irish Right and Equality Commission Act, also known as the Public Sector Duty, which places the responsibility on public bodies carrying out their function to promote equality, prevent discrimination, and protect the human rights of their customers, service users, employees. In that respect, the Arts Council Equality, Human Rights and Diversity Policy and Strategy has stated its commitment to the public sector duty, and it also requires, in that end, all publicly funded organizations to take positive policy measures to promote equality and opportunity, access, and outcomes. However, it is important to note that there is no direct legal remedy for failure to comply with the public sector duty under the 2014 Act. On the other hand, individuals with disabilities can still make a complaint about any failure by a public body to provide access under Part 3 of the Disability Act. So this complaint will be made to an inquiry officer within the body. And if the complainant is not satisfied, they can appeal to the ombudsman, who may investigate such complaints. As of late, the ombudsman has expressed his concern over the very low number of complaints made under the Disability Act, showing maybe a lack of knowledge of their rights from a person with disabilities and the complaint mechanisms.
Leah, 2 minutes.
Okay, I will go very briefly on accessibility and reasonable accommodation. So although they have in common that they contribute to removing barriers for persons with disabilities, we must distinguish them. The main difference: accessibility is group-related, reasonable accommodation is individualized. In general, accessibility is an anticipatory duty, whereas reasonable accommodation must be enforceable only after a person requests it. And accessibility is unconditional when reasonable accommodation is subject to limitation of disproportionate or undue burden. In Irish law, reasonable accommodation legislation predates the CRPD ratification. So we have the Employment Equality Acts, which includes a reasonable accommodation duty, unless it imposes a disproportionate burden on them. However, beyond employment relationship, we have the Equal Status Acts, which covers goods and services. Here, the limits are a bit broader, since it says that reasonable accommodation must be provided unless it would cost more than a nominal cost. Nominal cost according to caseload depends on circumstances, size, resources of the body. And some caseload looked into reasonable accommodation in culture. We would have Harrington versus National Concert Hall, for example. But we can also see that it's a dual standard compared to a limit that is very much broad in terms of goods and services, whereas much more limited in employment relationship. Okay, I will finish on this. I hope I kept within the time limits, and I will stop sharing now. Happy to take any questions.
That was fantastic, and thank you very much. And you did keep more or less to time, which is great. So with that, so I don't take up any time, I'm going to pass over to Gerald, Dr. Gerald Craddock, for our second presentation. And of course, if you have questions for Leah, please put them in the box, in the Q&A box, and we will answer them at the end. And I intend to distribute the questions among our 4 presenters as well. So Gerald, over to you.
Porrick, and leads very nicely into the presentation titled Inclusive Participation, Taking a Universal Design Approach. So the centre, just given, we're the only statute by a national government in the world, so we're a unique entity. We're part of the National Disability Authority, and the areas we cover built and digital environment. So I think it's significant change over the last number of years has been looking at design of services, particularly government services, public bodies, etc., but also looking at approach that we'll a little later. So a bit like Leah, we are definitely guided by the UN Convention. Articles 4 and 9 specifically pick out universal design, where it places human to the design process, so that buildings, environments can be designed to meet the needs of all users. So what we advise government departments, private sector, on how to design from the concept stage right through that it is inclusive for the needs and as much as possible along the way. So we're defined within the legislation, and the key words in the universal design are: can you understand and can you use, be it a building, a service, piece of technology, etc. And we cover people of any age, ability or disability, part of our remit. So I like this quote from probably one of the founding members of the term universal design, Ed Steinfeld from the States. And it's about a continual improvement process. So key here is what we know today hopefully differs from what we will learn tomorrow. So it is improvement. So it is a process that empowers a diverse population by improving human performance, health and wellness, and social participation. And that's by Steinfeld in 12. So in short, universal makes life easier, healthier, and friendlier for all, which I like as a kind of key reference we use. So just to reiterate, it is a huge, particularly under the UN Convention. We have shown on numerous projects that once you include universal design, and our colleague will follow this presentation, Eoin O'Herlihy, The examples I'll show shortly. The design and build of the central bank in Dublin. So it does lead to better, but also improves the planet. As in, if you design it right once, or as I was hearing this morning on the news, where a whole apartment block has to be pulled down because it's built in the wrong location. So huge impact on the environment as part of that. And it makes good business sense. If you service, where the word of mouth spreads, and it definitely improves your bottom line as far as concerned. So we look at universal design from a systems perspective, and Lee is there from what's happening, or particularly from an Irish perspective, what's happening at European level and national level. So policy, legislation, standards very much underpin a lot of our work. Then at an institute is the work that we do on monitoring and the whole area of certification as part of that. Codes of practice, which I'll mention briefly, but also then providing practical at the coalface for people to be able to deliver and improve their service or product. And finally, then the whole area of training and support being a vital ingredient. So without perspective, people can often get very frustrated that, okay, we've developed a very nice guideline or a code of practice, but unless you can refer it or it's directly legislation, then its impact can be quite negligible, that word. So looking at a journey, and this is work we're doing on a new code of practice, ability of public buildings. So we're just about to go out for public consultation in 2 weeks' time. So here are kind of the 10 key ingredients that we look at for a building to be universally designed. So the whole planning and access, and for people to have key information on the pre-visit information, which again, Donal, my colleague, will talk about shortly. The whole building and approach, so the physical access, easy parking to get to the building to start with, the entry, wayfinding being critical, particularly if you're talking about large buildings, circulation within the building and the environment, so be it at the use of toilets, etc., being very important. Programs, meetings, the exhibitions and events. So again, very important that this could be a physical building, but it also could be a festival in advance. Again, using this metrics here that we have on screen to help you to plan in advance the accessibility, be it summer or a next. Critical is emergency egress. So how do people not only enter the building, but also how they can safely leave the building? And a constant issue that we management and maintenance. Yes, a building can be designed to be accessible, but it's keeping it managed. We have often seen where the accessible toilet is often used as a storage area. That constant monitoring that your building and your service are accessible, very important. So I won't dwell too long on this slide. Leah touched a number of these points already. Legislation for public bodies. So the code of practice, as already mentioned, also the web accessibility directive. Donal will touch on that shortly. Equal stuff, the very much part of that. UNCRPD A key one that is underutilized is the EU directives on public procurement 2000 and the new one and 19, the accessibility requirements for procurement of products and services. That would be one I highlight as part of this presentation that is underutilized by public bodies. Will be further underpinned by the new Disability Act, which has to come into operation by June 2025. One of the key standards under this new European Accessibility Act has to be upgraded is the accessibility and usability of the built environment. And underneath that are two technical reports that give the finer detail on how a building is more accessible and usable to a diverse range of users. One of the key resources that we work closely with the National Transport Authority, Age Friendly Ireland, and the Green Schools Initiative with a design approach and looking at walkability audit tool for roads and streets. The example, we tried this with Kilrush in County Clare, and outcome of that was positive. We engaged the county engineer, road streets engineer, as part of the audit, and over €300,000 was provided to the town to make one of our just stepped down from our board. Aisling Glenn was one of the key initiators of trialing this in Kilrush. She's a power wheelchair user. Before having done, she had to, even though she was on the edge of Kilrush, only about 300 yards on the outskirts of Kilrush, she had to get public transport or again someone to drive her power wheelchair in, where now she can just use her power wheelchair and walk, as she says here, independently into town to work in her office as a barrister, working out Kilrush. So very positive using this audit tool and quite easy to use it. Again, the guidance that is available on our website, this can be operational. Underpinning the universal design are the 7 principles. Key one that underpins all our work is equitable use. And using the example, Central Bank of Ireland, e-learning, a free e-learning module that is available on our website, highlighting on the picture above is the gold leaf, our building on our quays here, where the central bank is located. So just taking one or two of the principles to outline what work has been carried out. The image you have here is top level, the center out over the Liffey. So first off, the view gives you to be able to locate yourself within the building. Also within the image are areas that might need a quiet area, but also seats that have armrests for people that might need extra support. On the right hand side is a coffee dock, room underneath for someone who might be can easily steer themselves in to operate the get their cup of coffee. Also, the panels on the wall are acoustically sensitive, so again, a quite neat and look at the building. Another example is on signage.
2 minutes.
Very good, almost there. 2 slides left, Porrick.
Thank you.
So here's an example on the building. which is again very important. It's showing number 7, so you're on the 7th level of the building. And this one I like very much, which is showing the handrail lighting on the handrail to show for people again who might have a visual difficulty in locating the handrail. Very nicely designed, and was heavily involved helping them to get these designs correctly in the building. So lots of free resources on our website. 2 key ones I'm highlighting here on the screen. For everyone's series for 900 pages on the built environment, so covering everything from the car park right through to horizontal vertical circulation, toilets, the maintenance and as I already had. The other document on the screen is one we just relaunched with the Department of Public Expenditure 2 weeks ago. It is our customer communication toolkit for services to the public. It used to be called Customer Communication Toolkit for Public Services, but what we were finding, lots of the public bodies are tendering out for services. So we've slightly titled "For Services to." So on that note, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Donal Fitzpatrick, and I am going to run the slides for Donal.
Actually, Gerald, if I can just change plan, thank you for the intro. If I can change plan slightly, I just noticed that a couple of the slides that I plan to use aren't in that slide deck that you have. So if it's okay with you, I'll actually I'll drive from here if that's all right.
All right, very good.
Thank you very much. Good to be here. Thank you. Say when it's good to go for my screen share.
Yeah, Gerald, you need to turn off yours there so we can hand over to Donal. It may take a few seconds. Yep. It's clear now, Donal. Yeah. Yes, we have a picture.
And we should have a presentation.
Yeah.
Lovely. Thanks very much. Again, sorry for that last minute change in plan. I just noticed it about 10 minutes ago. So what I'm going to talk to you about today I'm going to take two different approaches here. I'm going to take an initial stab at talking to you about some legislative context, and then to bring it into what I would consider some practical examples of digital and other considerations in the cultural context that we're actually working in. Now, underpinning a lot of the legislation that we have been referencing here are standards. And standards are defined by various organizations at national, European, and international level. And we are delighted to be involved at all levels in the standards world. For example, at the national level, we have with the National Standards Authority of Ireland, we have the Universal Design Standards Consultative Committee, and there we chair working groups. We get involved in working groups all around different areas of universal design. And that might stretch, for example, again, built environment, ICT, and a whole range of things, design for all. We also work with NSAI in the development of other European and international standards, which leads us on to the European level, where we work with European at CEN, ETSI, CEN-CENELEC, where again we chair and contribute to standards at that level. So out of that, for example, might have come, or have come, not know might about it, standards which will be very relevant to the European Accessibility Act, which I will come on to later on, and also to the Web Accessibility Directive, which both Leah and Ger have mentioned. So, for example, standard EN 301549 is very relevant to the Web Accessibility Directive. And that came out of work in which the centre was very heavily engaged at European level. And that centre, that standard basically means that if your website conforms to that particular standard, you're deemed to be in compliance with the Web Accessibility Directive. So what the centre does, the Web Accessibility Directive was transposed into Irish law on the 23rd of September 2020. And as I mentioned a second ago, websites and mobile apps of public bodies must comply with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WC, or EN 301549. They're very, very, very similar. And they also must have an accessibility statement. So what does this actually mean? It means that your websites, your mobile apps are written and coded in a certain way to follow certain guidelines. For example, you have nice headings, you have nice alt text. The forms on your websites are correctly labeled and are correctly presented to ensure that people using assistive technologies can actually access and interact with that particular content. What's very important, though, as part of this is that there is a good complaints and redress mechanism, and that mechanism is also accessible. We also work very closely. We work with our colleagues in the Irish Computer Society to build awareness and capacity in the areas of web accessibility. We have a whole series of webinars, again, available on our website, which we have run right across the last couple of years in the area of web accessibility. And this becomes really important, again, for cultural organizations, because the move to digital, both in terms of content and in terms of actually, for example, booking tickets, checking to see what's on the venue, and we'll come on to this, is really important that the website and the content all conforms to Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, i.e., and indeed the Web Accessibility Directive. So just looking at a snapshot of data from 22, if we're honest, it's not great. Overall level of compliance is low. 77.8% of pages tested actually have errors. That's not great. Now, just for a quick second, I mean, a lot of the errors that are showing up, and I speak here as somebody who has quite considerable experience in the web development environment, a lot of them can be very, very easily fixed. It might be, for example, that you have images that have no alternative text descriptions. It might be PDFs that have issues, because not only is it important that the website, I think, and I realize I'm repeating this, but the website must be accessible, but so must the content. Some more data from 22, just to give you some more insights. The types of errors, the top 3 errors: color contrast. Now, whilst Ger mentioned the whole notion of, universal design affecting everybody, not just people with disabilities. Well, color contrast is a great example of something that affects everybody, not just people, for example, with a diagnosed visual impairment. If you have a font, or if you have a color contrast that's difficult to read, for example, in sunlight on a mobile phone, that's going to affect everybody. So why not fix it? Use of PDF documents that are very poorly prepared. Again, that's something that's going to, if you fix that, you're going to benefit quite a lot of your users. And online forms, that's a big one. It's really important that forms are correctly presented, written, coded, so that assistive technologies such as screen readers and perhaps voice recognition software can interact with them. But again, if you fix that, it benefits the wider user base. And if you're trying to sell tickets, for example, putting a business case to this, if you fix your form and your form is easier to use, the likelihood is you'll sell more tickets for events through your web platforms. So we've mentioned the standards and upcoming new regulations and lead regulations The European Accessibility Act is going to come into operation in 2025. I have another slide on that in a moment. And we're going to be monitoring the new code of practice on accessible buildings from 2024. Others will be speaking about buildings. So I'm going to focus on the European Accessibility Act. And this is a very interesting act because, believe it or not, it's not actually rooted in disability legislation at all. It's based primarily in market surveillance. So the idea behind this particular act is to create a harmonized market for accessible products and services all across Europe. It comes into force, as I've said, in 2025, and it applies to things that you might find, for example, in your own venues, payment terminals and information kiosks, websites, again, procurement, ICT products and services, ebooks. So the opportunity might be that if you have, I don't know, perhaps a concert program or a catalog for a gallery or audio, digital guides for museums, that these can all be prepared in accessible ebook format, which the Act actually will provide much more guidance on in terms of accessibility across Europe. It'll be underpinned by harmonized standards, again, like the ones we've just mentioned, the EN 301549, which is all about ICT accessibility, or the EN 17212, a process-based standard for design for all. So moving to some practical things now in terms of the cultural context for digital accessibility. Based on the fact that this new legislation is coming in, and we have the Web Accessibility Directive, and we have other legislation that has been very nicely summarized by previous speakers, I think we've several phases to consider, and this is not a complete list. I was just thinking about my own experience, if I can interject this, as a blind person trying to interact with different cultural events, cultural venues, cultural websites. What does a venue have to offer? Booking tickets to attend the venue, available accessibility services within the venue, and accessing content on offer. Now, that content, just to say, could be digital content. It could be musical content. It could be any kind of content you like. But it's very important that I think these phases are actually considered, as well as the other environmental things, such as the built environment and the building that others have and will be speaking about. So if we take some of this. Has the website been designed with inclusion in mind? In other words, have you considered as many users as you possibly can when you're designing your website? Again, I'll stress the business case of this. The more user groups and the more users you consider, the more chance you have of bringing visitors to your website, etc. What type of content is up there? Text, graphics, video? Are they all accessible to all of your users? Again, think about the content that you're trying to actually get your visitors to, whatever cultural event you're trying to do, whatever artistic event you're trying to promote. Can everybody access the content? In other words, is all content accessible for all users? And I've just got a few examples. Are videos accessible? Do all images have alternative textual descriptions? Is text prepared in a manner which is easy to read? Some people with cognitive and intellectual disabilities need that to be done. And indeed, again, it's been proven to benefit everybody. It's vital, and Gerald highlighted the principle of equitable access. It's vital, if you want to guarantee equitable access, that all of these questions and more, but this is just a snapshot, be considered. Can all users attend your venue? Now, this is a really, really interesting one because, finding venues that, again, accommodate all types of users can be somewhat challenging. Booking tickets can be very, very challenging. Leaving aside the built environment, again, which I'm not going to talk about, is your ticket booking system accessible? I personally have had experience recently where I had to indicate, and it's mentioned here on the slide, about ensuring that, for example, the queuing system, do I have to prove that I'm a human, not a robot, and is that accessible? I had an instance recently with a football club in the UK where that wasn't actually the case. I had to have sighted assistance. So can I select the tickets that I want? Is there a way, for example, to find out where seat 122 block S23 is in the arena that I'm going to? You know, is it at the, you know, what end of the stadium is it at? Is it up high? Is it in the middle? These are just examples. I mean, I'm sure in your own organizational context, you can put others. Are there time limits, which mean that some users are not going to be able to actually have time to complete the booking? This is a big one, actually, particularly for either blind users or some users with physical and motor disabilities, where you're trying to actually navigate your way through a website to quickly book tickets. And all of a sudden it says, oh no, sorry, your 3 minutes have gone and you've lost your tickets. And it can be an absolutely huge problem. So accessibility services within the thing, the really important thing here, I want to stress the word dignity here, that when you're offering accessibility services, it's one thing to actually make them available, and that's laudable. But to do so in a manner that preserves the dignity of the person availing of those services is really, really important. And what you need to be able to present is what services are available. Again, on your website, nice and easy to find and carefully marked up and so on to actually to do that. How can they be booked? You know, are there alternative ways to book them, be it online, be it over the phone, be it any of that kind of thing? So alternative ways to do this, because, you know, not every user can avail of just one form of booking. Does the booking process guarantee that the dignity of the person insured? Now, this can be challenging because if it's done over the phone, your customer service agents need to be trained in the correct use of language, the correct approach to take, the right questions to ask, the right questions, the wrong questions not to ask. So that whole thing of dignity is really, really important, that not just providing the services, but doing so in a way that really makes the attendee feel that they're not a burden and that they're not, you know, they are, again, I'll stress, their dignity is being maintained. And last one, attending the venue. Well, we can talk about the building, but again, accessing the content. I had an experience recently, again, in a football stadium in the UK, where I rang up for the first time ever in many, many decades of going to football. I rang up and I said, I hear you have an in-stadium commentary available. Can I avail of that? And the lady said, yes, certainly. I said, fine. What do I have to do? Oh, she said, we'll just take a note of what seat you're in and it will be brought, the radio, the headset will be brought to you. Now that was wonderful because I was able to go into my seat as normal. A steward just walked up, handed me the headset, and it was done in a very, very, very nice way. That meant that I could access the content in a way that worked for me, whilst the people I was with who were sighted could just, again, sit and watch the game. This applies to a lot of different things, whether it's an audio guide for a museum, whether it's accessing audio description in a theatre. There are many, many contexts. But again, accessing the content and supplying accessible, different accessible ways to access that content is really, really, really important. And in conclusion, I'll just say, the only important thing about design is how it relates to people. As a quote from Victor Papanek, and I think that's a very, very apt quote on which to finish. So thank you very much indeed.
Donal, thank you so much for that. That was great. And you were speaking, I wouldn't say so quickly, but in terms of getting some really valuable content in there towards the end. I didn't want to interrupt you and give you a time check, but you were only about a few seconds over your 15 minutes. So thank you so much for timing that really well. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Eoin O'Herlihy. And while Eoin is just bringing up his slides for his presentation, I just want to tell people that as the presentations continue, Eoin's being the last one, you can, if you want, start to put questions into the box and the Q&A box, and we will take them at the end. So Eoin, over to you. I don't know, you're on mute. Okay.
Thanks, Pádraig. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm just going to present today on some practical ways to address inclusive participation in arts and cultural venues. You've heard from the other speakers about legislation, the importance of legislation and legislative requirements that we have. We've looked at reasonable accommodation. Gerald has covered the area of universal design and importantly covered the continuous improvement process, which is important for universal design. And also we've covered the area of digital accessibility. So what I'd like to do today is to try and answer, I tried to pose 3 questions, but also give you 9 ways that you can actually answer some of those questions. So the 3 questions that I'm just going to look at are, how can we embed accessibility? How can you embed accessibility in universal design within your organization? What are some practical ways to integrate universal design at your festivals, events, or venues? And what role can you play to improve accessibility in universal design? So hopefully at the end of the presentation, you might have some answers to some of those questions, but also thinking differently about within your own role, within your venue, or if you're organizing a festival, how you can actually, I suppose, embed accessibility and universal design in all parts of the process, but also the delivery of the festival and event and so on. So I suppose we've identified 9. Sorry, just get this going. We've identified 9 kind of key areas that can assist you in embedding or integrating a universal design, going from the importance of commitment to accessibility, so making sure that we have a good commitment in place to address universal design on an ongoing basis, the importance of planning for accessibility in universal design, so it becomes part of what you do in your everyday business and so on. The importance of training, education and awareness, so ongoing training and awareness around the area of universal design. As we've heard from some of the speakers, you can see that the legislation or the requirements are constantly changing. Good practice guidance is being developed on an ongoing basis, so we want to make sure that we keep in line with what's happening on good practice in the area of universal design. The importance of creating disability inclusive workplaces, so hiring people with disabilities, but also retaining your colleagues if they acquire a disability and so on. So it's important that we ensure that the workplaces are fully disability inclusive, or the venues are disability inclusive as well. A few of the speakers have already mentioned the importance of procurement and ensuring that everything that you buy addresses universal design. So we'll have a brief look at that. Accessible information provision, so making sure that we address things like digital spoken and signed information, and that's fully accessible and inclusive for all. Then we look at venues, buildings and facilities. We look at events, meetings and seminars, and we look at programming participation in the arts. So I'm just hopefully going to run through these 9 key headings and give you an overview of some of the things that you can be doing, or some of the ways to improve accessibility in universal design. So number 1 is commit to accessibility in universal design. So ensure your organization, your venue commits to accessibility and universal design. So here's 5 ways that you can go about that. Number 1 is, I suppose, the importance of senior management commitment. So we call it the top-down approach to accessibility in universal design. So make sure that you know that it's been driven from the top of the organization. So that's going to be really important that you get that commitment in place. The second thing would be to have a dedicated point of contact who can assist people with disabilities at the venue or at the festival, or if they're attending a theatre and so on. So it's really important that, again, for example, public bodies, if you're a public body, you have to appoint an access officer under the Disability Act. But if you're a private, small organisation, for example, it'd be good to have a dedicated point of contact, sometimes called an access officer or an access champion. to assist customers with disabilities. And again, it would be good to look at maybe setting up some sort of universal design team who's going to, I suppose, facilitate the implementation of universal design, because universal design goes across everything that you do within your own organization. You might not be a specialist in HR, you might not be a specialist in the area of digital or designing websites. So you need to bring a team of people together that can assist you and facilitate universal design within the organization. Make sure that people are made aware of the points of contact is another example. So it's, if you have access officers or you have champions in place that are facilitating accessibility, make sure that your end users are aware of the people who are there to assist. A really important one is consultation. So it could be given its own heading, but the importance of consultation and stakeholder engagement. So make sure you consult with people with disabilities, find out what some of the barriers or challenges that they may have accessing your venue, accessing your festival, learn as you go along, and continuously improve, as Gerald has already said, continuously improve universal design. So a really important area there would be consultation. So engage with the community, find out what people's needs are, and see how you can make improvements. And then on an annual basis allocate a budget towards accessibility. So there are just 5 or 6 examples about how you can improve your commitment to universal design. Number 2 is planning for accessibility. So ensure you put the necessary plans and procedures in place to ensure you embed accessibility and universal design in everything that you do. And I think that's important. Universal design goes across everything that you do within your organization. So how can you embed it within your own organization? So it's really important that you plan for accessibility. So some simple ways of doing that would be benchmarking. So benchmark your existing levels of accessibility and universal design in line with good practice. So we're not just talking about a physical access of your built environment, we're talking about an audit of your services, your employment policies and procedures. We're talking about an audit of your websites, your digital online presence. How are you making sure that universal design is addressed, your welcoming customer services or visitor experience, and so on. So it's really important that you identify what national and international guidance and standards are out there in your own area, whether it's a festival or a venue or a gallery and so on, and see how you can see where you are at the current point of time and continuously improve accessibility. So a few ways of doing that would be to develop a policy and an action plan. So develop a universal design policy, which is outlining your commitment in this area, and then develop an action plan. So you might decide to develop a 3 or a 5-year action plan on how to improve universal design. Again, the other thing then would be, if you do develop your policies and your action plan, is make them available for members of the public so they can view them, but also promote the good work that you are doing around the area of universal design. As the previous speakers have said, by making your services, your websites accessible, you're going to drive more customers to your business. So there's a lot of good benefits to addressing accessibility in universal design. So number 2, plan for accessibility in universal design. Develop policies, develop action plans, promote those to your visitors and your customers and so on. Number 3, education and awareness. Identify your organization's training needs in relation to accessibility and universal design. So it could be training for your volunteers, it could be training for your staff members, it could be training for security. Lots of different types of training that you could be looking at. So there's the general disability awareness, equality training. So again, all staff or volunteers and security, for example, should undergo the general disability awareness training. Covers things like your understanding of accessibility and universal design, how to effectively communicate with people with disabilities, how to provide assistance, and so on. But then there might be more technical training that you might want to undertake as well, like, for example, technical training for your facilities managers about making the venues, buildings, and facilities more inclusive. There might be training for people who are looking after procurement, so that everything that you buy is accessible. You might want to roll out technical training, for example, on digital accessibility on websites. And then you'll have areas such as participation in the arts. So there'll be people within your organization who are organizing exhibitions, events, seminars, but also maybe arts programs on a Saturday morning or in the evening time, and you want to make sure that they're fully inclusive for all. So there, you might want to roll out some training on participation in the arts, outreach and partnership, and then things like consultation. So again, the number 3 is to identify what the training needs are for your organization and make sure that you roll out training on an ongoing basis. Number 4 is HR, and it's really looking at the creation of disability inclusive workplaces. So making sure that you can, that you are an organization that's actively hiring people with disabilities, but also that you have the policies and procedures in place to retain people with disability, people in your organization who might acquire a disability and so on. And we can spend a day talking about inclusive HR or inclusive workplaces, but there's kind of 5 or 6 areas that you look at outside of the built environment and so on. Things like inclusive recruitment, so making sure all aspects of your recruitment process are fully accessible. And that could be everything from providing information in alternative formats for someone attending an interview, or it could be making sure that you put a strapline on your advertising to say that we're an inclusive employer in the area of equality and so on. Disclosure is about creating an organization that allows people to feel that you're positive, to allow people a positive workplace, to allow people to disclose that they have a disability, which is really important. Reasonable accommodation has already been covered, but again, we have legal requirements to reasonably accommodate all employees with disabilities under the Employment Equality Act. So it's really important that we have policies and procedures in place to address that. The area of retention, if someone acquires a disability, I've mentioned this a few times, but if someone acquires a disability, you want to make sure that you retain that employee and you have the right, again, procedures in place to do so. Other areas like performance management and absence management and so on. So I suppose to get you thinking about how can you ensure that you are looking at becoming or continuously improving the area of inclusive employment or inclusive human resources and so on. So that's number 4. Number 5 is products and services. I always highlight this as a really important one. How can you make sure that everything that you purchase within your organization, for example, if you're going out getting a new graphic designer to create visitor guides or to create exhibition stands or exhibition materials and stuff like that, how are you ensuring that they'll address the needs they'll address the universal design? So even things like the size of your fonts, the colors that you use, the graphic design, etc., etc. So you want to be assessing the providers to see if they have any experience on universal design. You want to be writing universal design into the brief, into the public procurement tendering exercise and so on. So it's really important that as part of the procurement process, whether it's looking at procuring new furniture, new websites, new security or catering services, that you think about accessibility. So a simple example of the security being the first point of contact when you come into a venue. If they're provided with disability awareness training, they're going to be able to assist visitors with disabilities, and they're also going to be able to effectively communicate and so on. So a simple example of putting a requirement that disability awareness training has to be undertaken by all security personnel is one example of procurement. Again, as has been previously mentioned, procurement is covered. It's a legal requirement under Section 27 of the Disability Act for public bodies. But in this slide, I've just given you three ways that you can address public procurement. So 1, review your policies, practices, and procedures, and identify how they can be revised to contain information about universal design. Ensure accessibility in universal design is considered in all your tendering exercises or your public your purchasing, and then promote this requirement to all your staff or your colleagues. So make sure your colleagues are aware of the requirements in the area of procurement and accessibility. Information provision is number 6. And again, we've ensure all written, digital, spoken and signed information provided is accessible and usable for all. And in the next slide, I'm just highlighting different areas. Like, for example, under digital information, it could be websites, it could be booking a ticket, it could be your maps and guides, your accessible videos, your social media, providing information in alternative formats and so on. Under written information, we're talking about things like plain English, easy to read, providing information in alternative formats. But again, if you're creating guidebooks and maps and exhibition stands, the information needs to be accessible. And then under spoken and signed, it's everything from events to festivals, accessible tours, exhibitions, programs, assistance and support, the importance of meeting and greeting. So it's a really wide area, and it really impacts on the needs of all your visitors. So it's really important that you look at developing strategies around creating inclusive and accessible information. Gerald has already mentioned some toolkits that are out there that can assist you in this area. So customer communications toolkit for public services, a universal design approach. It covers written, spoken and signed, and digital communication, a really useful toolkit there to address the areas of accessible information provision. And I suppose to just kind of conclude the information provision, number 6 is look at things like developing a communication policy around the area of inclusive information. Look at putting systems in place to ensure that information is consistent, such as things like style guides, and make sure information is available in alternative formats for people with disabilities. And 5, create accessible and usable information for all. So it's a wide area. It's again, so it's covering digital, spoken and signed, and face-to-face communications. Number 7 is event.
2 minutes.
No bother.
Thanks.
Number 7 is events. Ensure all events, meetings, seminars are accessible and fully inclusive for all. So I suppose it's important to think about when you're organizing your events or your festivals, is have you considered, have you got a universal design checklist in place? If you don't, come back to me afterwards and I'll send you links to the various checklists that you can use. But it's all aspects of the event. It's promotion and marketing. It's the booking the venue. It's on the day of the event, and it's follow-up and feedback. So there's lots of useful checklists out there. If you even go to Google and Google accessible events checklist, you'll get some really good information there. But make sure you're considering all aspects, whether it's, as I said, creating your application forms or your booking forms, address all areas of accessibility and so on. Number 8 is ensure all your buildings and facilities are accessible and usable for all. And a few little tips here is, 1, you need to look at carrying out an access audit. So an access audit of your building, it's recommended that that's carried out every 3 years. And as Gerald has mentioned, a universal design approach. So everything from your wayfinding to your external environment to your circulation, your facilities, your communication within the building and so on. But it's not just about the existing building. It's also about the operations or the day-to-day operations. So carry out regular checks of your facilities, such as testing of your alarms in your accessible toilets, testing your hearing enhancement systems in your hearing enhancement systems at your reception desks and so on, but also your audio guides and stuff like that they're fully operations. When carrying out repairs and refurbishments, use them as opportunities to improve accessibility. So that could be everything from painting a wall and improving color contrast. So improving color contrast for your website, but also improving color contrast in your buildings. Some other aspects here. So provide pre-visitor information to allow people to plan their journeys in advance. 2 good examples, the Victoria and Albert Museum in the UK and the National Gallery are good examples, and they provide good examples of pre-visitor information. Ensure you address health and safety, so safe evacuation for people with disabilities, and ensure that you address accessibility as part of your public procurement of the built environment. So the last one then, Pádraig, here is number 9, and it's about programming participation in the arts. Ensure you embed accessibility and universal design in all aspects of your programs, and ensure the needs of everyone is addressed as part of participation in the arts. So some of the stuff we've covered already, such as inclusive events and festivals. So it's really important that you from the onset of organizing a festival, accessibility is on the agenda at all stages of the planning, at the promotions, the booking the venue, on the day, after the day, feedback and so on. Accessible exhibitions and programming. So just to highlight, and Pádraig, you might be highlighting this as well, but there's a very good useful guide called Shift in Perspective. It's an arts and disability resource pack, and it covers everything from how to create inclusive programming, how to organize and promote assisted performances, and how to develop inclusive events and festivals. So that's a shift in perspectives, and I'm sure Padraig will be covering that in a few minutes. So just to conclude, as I mentioned, I was just trying to highlight 9 areas that to address accessibility and universal design. As I've mentioned, universal design is impacted in everything that you do. So it's whether it's creating the disability inclusive workplace, whether it's organizing the accessible event or festival, whether it's looking at the rebranding or the graphic design or the website, whether it's looking at the area of training. So I suppose the big question at the start was, what role can you play to ensure universal design and accessibility is addressed? And I suppose it's by embedding universal design into everything that you do, and as Gerald mentioned previously, to continuously improve universal design within your venue when you're organizing your festivals and events and so on. So thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you, Eoin. And if you wanted, turn off your presentation, that's great. I did deliberately let Eoin talk over a little bit, or talk on for a little bit extra, mainly because I was aware of his 9 points because I'd seen the PowerPoint, but also I think there was a certain amount of overlap with what everyone else was saying, but particularly with Ger, and there were some glitches on Ger's audio as we were working through. Now it was grand, but just I think giving Eoin a little bit of extra time to reiterate was actually quite helpful. Now we do have some questions. We are running behind time, so we're on 48 minutes past the hour. We were to finish at 4. I will let us run until, if we get the questions, till 10 past 4, but no further, okay? And I will try and get you all away at that, or even beforehand. And Leah, I have a question for you from one of the participants, if I can find it now, which is, can you just explain reasonable accommodation again? Can you give it, and you don't need to bring up your slides at this stage, if that's okay.
Yes, no problem. So I think, you need to differentiate it from accessibility. So it's really about an individual and it's upon the request of an individual. So they might come to your venue and ask, well, this is what I need to be able to enjoy this. And then you will have to act upon it, or at least, unless it presents a disproportionate burden. I mean, that's if it's, that's in employment. Otherwise, under the Equality Acts, it's under the nominal costs. So for this, really defining nominal costs is a bit hard. It's really it's on a case-by-case basis. So it's based on what resources as an organization do you have that you can use to justify the fact that you cannot accommodate that person. So that's really the big differences, is that it's individualized, it's ex nunc, so it's after a request, and it has limits, contrary to accessibility. I hope it was clear.
That's great. Okay, thank you, Leah. I'm going to now maybe, actually, Eoin, can I go back very quickly to you? Which is, I've had a question here which is asking, is there an organization or a specialist that you would recommend that can help with reviewing and implementing accessibility for an event or a venue?
Yeah, Padraig, I suppose I'll hand that back to you maybe, but we would provide that service ourselves. I'm not trying to sell our services, but we would be one of the organizations that we've worked with a number of arts venues around the country, looking at their services, their information provision, organizing accessible events, and a recent example of organizing an accessible festival. So we would provide similar services.
So what you're saying is you do, and I know because we've worked with you in the past and we've recommended you to do access audits specifically for venues or other art spaces. But what you're saying is you also do consultancy work in a broader sense as well.
Yeah, so we would go in and, for example, we would go in and look at the nine pillars that I've just mentioned, or the 9 areas, whether it's organizing an accessible event or creating an accessible festival, and we would look at all aspects of when you're organizing a festival and how you can address universal design. So down to the information provision, the written information, the website, the digital. So we would give you a kind of a strategy on how you could actually create an accessible festival, but also, addressing the areas of procurement and addressing the importance of making sure people have been provided with training and making sure that you have the right information available for people who are attending the festival and stuff like that. But also then you can look at the venue where the festival has been held and stuff. So yeah.
Okay, that's great. And I am now going to turn to Ger, and maybe Ger, you could and I know Eoin, you could have answered this question too, but just to spread the love around a bit, are there specific accessibility checklists available for small arts festivals or working in community buildings or public spaces?
Thanks, Warwick. Well, I think the 9 pillars there that Eoin has there, I think is a very nice short summary of what are the key elements required. More technical, the building for everyone, but again, it's broken down into 9 separate booklets that, depending on what you're looking at, you can hone in quite rapidly to see what you. And under each section, there's a checklist, so you can quickly go to the checklist, and then further information is available within the documents. But there is a checklist each section. I think there's a total of 30 plus checklists across the 9 booklets. So, but Eoin's list there is a good start.
Okay, that's great. And what I would say just before I ask my next, I have 2 more questions in the box at the moment. So if anybody wants to add a question in, we will get to it. But Donal, or actually, yeah, Donal, moving to yourself, what is the best way to go about testing web accessibility? Have we got Donal there, or?
Yeah. He's
okay.
just turning on his mic there, yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. You're still on mute, Donal. Oh,
great, there we go. So now it's working.
Yeah.
My keyboard wasn't working. Thanks very much. A great question, that one. So there are several phases to testing web accessibility. I will say the first thing about that is that user involvement and user engagement and user consultation is one of the most important things you can do here. In terms of, if you like, internal testing, there are 2 things. Firstly, there are some automated checkers out there. Now, what I would say about those is that they only capture a small fraction of web accessibility issues. So they can look at the code, for example, and they can see that an image has no alternative text. What they can't do is, for example, do some analysis to say whether the alternative text for an image is suitable. So you have 3 pillars to it, I would say. Firstly, automated accessibility will get some issues. Then you have manual testing, which you go through it and you literally manually check for issues. There are various guidelines called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG. Again, the EN 301549, as I mentioned earlier. So there are checklists or checkpoints in there that you can use to actually verify whether your website is accessible. But the really important bit is get users who use specific assistive technologies, who have specific disabilities, to test it. We would say test the extremes and over-test the extremes. And if your user says there is an issue, it doesn't matter what the automated system or what the manual accessibility check tells you. If the users come back and say there's an issue, that trumps everything. So they'd be the three pillars that I would use.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And Donal, and I'm going to go back to Leah. Or am I? Just a moment. Sorry. Just bear with me a sec, because I have got some more questions and I thought I was ready to go with one. No, I'm going to go to Eoin. Eoin, can you recommend a course or toolkit for plain English? Or maybe that's a question for Ger, but I'll pass it to Eoin first.
Yeah, I know that NALA have some guidelines on designing for plain English, and again, I would have a few other. We have an online library here in our own office, and I would have a few others there. So what I might do is share pouring a few links to other guides on
and NALA
English afterwards.
And NALA
would have. Sorry, go ahead.
Just for those who aren't familiar, NALA.
The National Adult Learning Agency.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
okay.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. I'm always conscious that some people don't know the acronyms that other people use every day. Okay. No, it's great. Okay, Donal, back to you with a question. Is there anything available to help with social media accessibility that you would recommend?
I don't know specific guidelines, but again, the same rules that govern web accessibility will also govern social media accessibility, because that content typically resides either on a website. I mean, Twitter, Facebook, they're still websites or mobile applications. So the same rules will actually apply. You're also limited in some instances by what the platform will let you do. So, I mean, if you post images, for example, make sure they have alt text. If you have videos up there, make sure the videos are actually accessible, etc. So I would say that the same rules apply, really, and check the platform's accessibility features to see what's available on each individual platform.
Just come in on that. My learned friend there, Donal, forgets about the communications tool published 2 weeks ago.
Absolutely.
As a checklist on how to make social media, be it blogs, whatever, Twitter, etc., accessible. So I put in the link there, the new guidance that published with partners, Department of Public Expenditure, are their new grandiose title. If you want to know the new title, it's Department of Public Expenditure, Delivery and Reform, which I'm not quite sure who came up with that title for the department, but that's there in the link there for people to access.
Great. Right. Now, I have another question here, which, Eoin, I might pass to you. And what would you recommend for a venue that is in a listed inaccessible building that want to partner with people with physical disabilities?
Again, so there's lots of ways. I think the first thing I would suggest maybe is to get maybe an access audit carried out, and then to come up with creative solutions. So it's about a balance between accessibility and the conservation and sustainability of the building, but also there are managed solutions to make a venue, a protected structure, accessible. So again, it would be about, I suppose, doing a bit of a an access audit of the building itself and coming up with ways to make that venue accessible. So, for example, in a protected structure, you may not be able to make every floor of the venue accessible. However, you may be able to make the entry level accessible. So you would provide the same range of services and facilities at entry level that you would provide on alternative levels. And then you may have to reasonably accommodate people with disabilities in some of the service that you're providing within the building. So it can be about it can be when you go in and do the audit on a protected structure, for example, you'll be coming up with creative solutions, but also you'll be coming up with ways to overcome the barriers, but also manage solutions such as reasonable accommodations. But I suppose a key thing there would be, for example, if you're going to have meeting spaces or event spaces or seminar rooms, that you would try to provide them at accessible entry level, so that the key facilities are accessible for everyone, the toilets, the canteen, or the breakout spaces and stuff like that. And then you might have your offices at the upper levels, and might have some offices on the ground floor. But same range of services and facilities at entry level are accessible, managed solutions. But first thing, carry out an access audit.
Okay. And Leah, and I'm going to pass this question to you, and I'm going to have to paraphrase it and try and make sense of it because of the way it's written. And I'm making one or two assumptions. So the person who wrote this question may actually come back with the clarification. But under our current legislation, and let's say we're stretching the whole way from venues or arts organizations that are public bodies or local authority owned, right through to private entities. What obligations exist, let's say, if they aren't accessible, but they want to work with people with disabilities or engage people with disabilities to actually provide an accessible space that as an alternative accessible space? Are there any obligations?
Thanks, Fark. Yeah, I was looking at that question also, and I wonder if it's not a follow-up to the question that you just asked, Eoin.
It may be, but I know
Yeah.
I'm being slightly mischievous as well, because I hear that there are certain art centres, I should be no more specific than that, where because of health and safety, there's one in particular that's become inaccessible, because the access was actually a temporary structure that's laid down to make it accessible, and it was deemed kind of not compliant with health and safety. And the issue then is there an alternative space where that artist could rehearse, present, etc., because in this case the only accessible space is the main stage, which is considerably bigger. So that was where I was kind of coming at as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the person has said, yeah, it was a follow-up. Yeah, so it was a follow-up to that original question. But maybe you just wanted to explore that one for me just a tiny bit, because it is our last question.
Yeah, well, definitely. I guess if it's a collaboration with an artist, you also have then legislation more on employment that will come into place. But like, should they pay rent? Like, if they should rent an accessible venue, I don't know if it meant ask like for the body, so the art center, for example, to rent a venue for.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I don't really have
you don't have a solution, is what you're saying.
Yeah, no, it's I have not
okay.
Thought of it as a
So in other words, what you're probably saying is that there may be a creative solution, but it probably falls outside the legislation as it currently is at the moment.
Yes, I'm a bit taken.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, sorry, that's one of the practical questions we do get asked from time to time, and it does arise in collaborations where, you know, there are artists who will work with a venue from a development perspective who are very willing to support, but actually there may be issues around presentation and even rehearsal within the actual space. So I suppose that's why I kind of stretched the question a little bit. Okay, we're on 7 minutes past 4, and go on.
Yeah, Eoin has his hand raised, just so
Yeah.
maybe he wants to come in.
Yeah. Okay, Eoin, sorry, I didn't see that because you're tiny on my screen now.
No. You're grand. Just, I suppose, just to follow up on the question, and my internet went a bit wobbly there as well. So, service providers, so the arts venues would be service providers, and I suppose under equal status legislation, they must reasonably in the area of in the provision of goods and services that they provide. So I think it's just to kind of come in on that is that there is a legal requirement for the service provider who would be the venue in this example to reasonably accommodate people with disabilities in the provision of the services they provide. So if you know, facilitating artists is part of the service they provide, then just to be mindful that they must reasonably accommodate people with disabilities as well, and the other 8 grounds in that regard.
Okay, that's very helpful. And in fact, I thought of one question of my own for Donal, which I want to ask, and this is the last question. Donal, obviously Ger and yourself spoke about universal design, and but it strikes me, even, you know, when Eoin was talking about our shift in perspective guide, which I'm glad to hear it still is useful after all this time. It probably needs updating, but I'm glad to hear it can be still a point of reference on. But is that some of the services we have, and I'm thinking of things like audio description and captioning, which were very much developed in the West End and on Broadway, are very much add-on services. And I'm curious, and I know this is less to do about legal requirements in the future, but about the future. In terms of universal design, how do you see some of those services in a theatre or gallery context going? What do you see them becoming in the future?
It's very hard to know, Pádraig, to be honest. I mean, from a universal design perspective, they perfectly they fit in with the principles of universal design. I mean, in terms of equitable use, in terms of things like, you know, even things like tolerance for error or fallbacks. You know, I mean, I could envisage. I mean, a great example of this actually comes from things like subtitles on services like Netflix. Not directly the same, where they were designed originally, obviously, for, you know, in the visual context, but it's possible now, given tablets, given iPhones, given other platforms, to hook up a Braille display to those things and actually read subtitles in Braille for whatever the content you're taking is. That's opened up the world to a lot of people. So I mean, in terms of other things, you know, other facilities within theatres, I mean, Ger has a great example that he often cites of, for example, the shopping centre. You know, you go to the supermarket on Saturdays and the door opens and it's a flat entry. That benefits absolutely everybody. And I think there's an awful lot to be said for some of the stuff in theatres, not just benefiting people with disabilities, but benefiting absolutely everybody. Yeah. You know, Ger, I don't know whether you'd like to come in on some of that there.
Yeah, and I am going to wrap up at that, but thank you, Donal, and I'll let Ger just respond, and we'll finish at that then.
Yeah, thanks, Pádraig and Donal. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's if you design, the key term that we use, we talk about designing out the design at the very start. the less accommodations we need to be considering down the road. So taking what Donal said and your question, Pádraig, yeah, these should be day one. The most captioning on TV, etc., are whatever second language users. The second are people who are on multiple devices at the same time. And third are how we're doing work at home and have the captionings on their program. So people who are visual impairment, I think, are number 6 on TV. So
okay, I'm going to finish at that. I'm going to finish at that and thank everyone. Obviously, I would like to thank you, the attendees, and all our speakers, Leah, Gerald, Donal, and Eoin. It's been a really, really interesting afternoon. And if there's one thing I think I've learned, and I hope the people have garnered from this, is that there are a whole lot of resources outside the arts that we should be drawing into the arts and cultural space, because in many ways, you know, some of our agencies, organizations, and people like the National Disability Authority, the Centre for Excellence in Universal Design, the work that's going on down in Maynooth, in NUI Maynooth, with Leah and her colleagues, and the lead there, Professor Delia Ferry, in the area of law, and the work that Eoin is doing around access auditing and consultancy. There's a huge amount of thinking, work, and expertise that we can actually draw into the arts, and I'm really grateful for their time, but also what we've learned. I also want to thank the ADI team, and in particular Adrian Caldwell, our Access and Training Officer, who has coordinated today's event. So thank you all for joining us. Please feel free to get in touch if there's anything you want to follow up on, or if there's any additional information that you think you need that the presenters have mentioned, and we will see if we can try and get that to you. We will be making the recording available with embedded captions and the ISL within a short period of time. So it'll be there as a resource for people to use again. But for now, thank you very much on behalf of Arts and Disability Ireland.
thank you, Pádraig. Everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.